Welcome to the Blessors of Israel podcast. I'm Matthew Dodd, Executive Director of Blessors of Israel, in studio with Pastor Rich Jones, who is the founder and chairman of Blessors of Israel. Great to be with you today, Pastor Rich.
Thank you, and I think it's important to give an update on what is happening in the war in Israel against Hamas. But I think also it would be good for us to give an update on some of the other key players in the world right now. I'm thinking of Russia, Iran, perhaps China, Turkey. But let's start with what's happening with Israel and Hamas. So we know that the army is amassing at the border. They have not fully gone into Gaza. But you are seeing that there's limited, what do you perceive to be the strategy right now? Like, why is there a delay, I think is in a lot of people's minds. What is your take on?
Well, I think you have, number one, a concern for the hostages that are obviously trapped behind the Gaza line there. I think that's a big concern. I think you also have international pressure, especially from President Biden, the White House.
To go slow.
To hold back. And that also ties in with the hostages. I think there's also been, by slowing down, an opportunity for Israel to strategize as to how to best approach this type of warfare, because you're dealing with tunnels.
That's right.
And this is a very, very dangerous type of warfare that can exact a lot of casualties on Israel's side if great care is not exercised.
I mean, I believe, if the reports I'm reading are correct, that there is more than 300 miles.
That's what I've heard.
311 is the figure I read, of miles, underground tunnels. I mean,
they've been doing for years. For many, many years. You know, it began on the Egypt border there, where they were just moving goods and people back and forth from the Egyptian border. But then it became more intricate over the years towards Israel and more an offensive type of approach to attack the Israelis.
So these fighters predominantly are hiding up in tunnels, right? So Israel is going to have to strategize a whole new approach to war. It's really tunnel warfare. And so, you know, in many ways, there's that delay needed for, number one, I think, fully mapping, to strategizing. Look, you want to be so careful. You don't want to walk into a trap.
Absolutely.
Right? So they have to fully strategize. You brought up the point, they have to understand the location of these hostages, because that's where they're being hidden. And
there are a lot of unknowns still with regards to that.
Now, the latest we heard, 220...
24 is what I've heard.
And that, the releasing of some of these hostages, I think, is worth discussing also. But let's stay on to these tunnels for a moment. And the strategy of slowly moving, I think, is wise. I think it does a number of things, right?
Wise for who?
Israel is wise, because I believe, number one, they need to understand the dilemma, the problem, right? Before you go into a battle, you need to know your strategy. You need to know what you're going to encounter. You need to know your enemy. So you've got to graph, chart, plot, discern where are these tunnels, because frankly, they're booby-trapped. They're all booby-trapped.
Couldn't agree more.
Right, so they got to know what they're doing, number one. And then number two, I believe that they are, of course, refining tunnel warfare. There is, for example, we've been reading about a new technology of what they call sponge bombs, right? And that is the release of chemicals that when they're thrown together, they explode into a solid form of like a solid foam that is virtually, well, not impossible, but very, very difficult to penetrate through. And so the strategy is, of course, to seal off certain passages so that they've got control. As they move through, they've got control of the tunnels that they want to control and not be caught by a trap, right? So this is a new technology. They're creating a whole new strategy of tunnel warfare. Of course, you've got robots, but they're quite limited, frankly, underground, because they got to be controlled by electronic signals that don't do well underground.
Exactly right.
So I think the strategy is be wise, be careful, be slow. And frankly, at the same time, it allows them to further create damage from the air. Although we're seeing a great tragedy unfold. One of the terrible tragedies of war is the innocents.
Yes.
And I think we ought to recognize that there are a lot of innocents that are losing their lives. Our heart goes out to them as well.
For those who are truly innocent, but we also, in fairness, need to say that there are many Palestinians who are very much in support of what Hamas did as well.
Understood. But Israel...
But I grieve for the children.
We grieve for the innocents, right? Children primarily,
Yes.
Women that had nothing to do with these things. But Hamas, frankly, has embedded themselves. They're using the whole of Gaza, frankly, as a human shield.
Exactly right.
Right, and so...
Well, they were even prohibiting their people when they were given the warning by Israel to go south of the Gaza River. They were saying, and they have even recordings of it, we are being prohibited by Hamas to go south like you recommended.
And, of course, we know it's been very well documented that they will put caches of arms underneath a hospital or underneath a UN school, for example, in these underground tunnels.
Firing those missiles from those locations as well.
Right. And so, this can end today, frankly, if Hamas would, number one, release the hostages. That is the primary goal of Israel today, is release of those hostages. Now, number two is the destruction, you might say, the annihilation of Hamas. So they are committed. They're saying, no more. This is the last that we will have this happen. So what does that end look like? I think that is yet to be seen.
Well, I've heard many from the Israel side saying if Benjamin Netanyahu and the government does not completely remove Hamas, then there will be consequences for them in terms of them in office. Mm-hmm. They will find someone else who can finish the job.
But in many ways, it's a very, very difficult challenge, right? Removing, and I don't want to use an untoward analogy, but to some degree, it's a little bit like trying to get the rats out of New York City. I mean, yeah, you could get a lot of them out, but
are you going to get them all?
Are you going to get them all?
Well, and it's especially difficult when the population, the children, are indoctrinated at such a young age.
Right.
It's built into their DNA, so to speak, at a very, very young age. So how do you unwire that when it's so strongly wired in?
Well, and exactly right. That's the problem. But these children are being raised up in an environment of tremendous suffering. I mean, Israel has put a blockade on Gaza. There is a lot of suffering in Gaza. But at the same time, Israel would say, look, we want peace. Right?
Well, they pulled out in 2005.
Right.
And then you've had millions of dollars funneled into Gaza. They could have made that the Mediterranean resort on the Gaza Strip, right? But what has that money been used for?
Well, of course, arms, tunnels, concrete walls in those tunnels, right? Taking plumbing and piping and turning them into missiles. That is the misuse entirely of, but why, right? What is their intent? You see, it's really a question of what came first, right? The Gaza blockade came as a result of Hamas taking the governance control over Gaza, and Hamas had already demonstrated that they were a terrorist organization intent on the destruction of Israel. So Israel's response to a terrorist organization taking over the Gaza area by putting a blockade, and essentially what they're saying is, look, demonstrate that you mean peace and they will have peace. But Hamas immediately started chanting the destruction of Israel.
They don't want peace. At the end of the day, they want Israel removed from the river to the sea. Palestine must be free. That's all they want. And therefore, how do you negotiate with that?
Well, you cannot, number one. But my point is that you have another generation of children.
Exactly right.
Right. I think, 50% of the population of Gaza is less than 18. Right. And they've basically lived up now. They've grown up in siege, you might say. And so they are indoctrinated in hate.
Couldn't agree more.
And now a lot of people could say, well, who can blame them? Well, I think Israel can blame them because Hamas is really the one that's perpetrating this really tragic aim. Look, there can be peace today. Let's speak peace. But that is not what is being spoken. And this is what, and I know we're getting off here a little bit, but when I see so many students, right, at quote elite universities taking the side of Hamas, it is just unbelievable to me that quote higher education has stooped so low.
And in fact, a recent poll was shown that the older generation in the United States is very much in support of Israel. But the younger generation in particular, your Gen X, Gen Z, they are more pro-Palestinian.
And may I submit that the reason is because they're uneducated and uninformed. But what they are hearing, of course, is distorted. It's all about
by
the
those who are educating them,
right.
Their teachers and professors.
Exactly right. So it's all about that narrative.
Exactly.
Right. And so, again, they're blaming Israel for the oppression of Gaza Strip. But if they could just recognize that Israel has no desire to do that, if there can only be a desire for peace on both sides.
Couldn't agree more.
Israel wants peace.
Let's talk about some other actors.
All right.
Russia, for instance.
Interesting.
Today, they received a delegation into Moscow from Hamas.
Hamas leadership.
And Iran.
Right.
That were there.
I believe it was a deputy foreign minister from Iran.
Exactly right. And they received them in to show their support of Hamas and Iran, and again, this idea of a two-state solution, and that Hamas, the Palestinians, have the right to throw off the shackles that have been put upon them by Israel.
But there is so much that's wrong with this. Number one, the so-called two-state solution. Hamas doesn't want a two-state solution.
Never have.
They want a one-state solution. The annihilation of Israel will create a one-state solution.
By the way, do you think it really will stop if Israel was gone? Or do you think they'll just continue to go after the Jews wherever they may be?
Well, of course, that's true, but I think the next aim would be the Great Satan.
Exactly right.
Right. But number one, they go to discuss, quote, a two-state solution. Well, as we know, that's not applicable. Number two, they're supposedly negotiating or talking about hostages.
Yes. Now, the Iranian foreign minister went to the UN today saying that in exchange for the hostages, the 224 hostages, Hamas wants the 6,000 Palestinians that are now in Israeli prisons.
And, of course, Israel says we don't negotiate with terrorists. But they did in the past, and frankly, when, let's say, push comes to shove, they will.
So Israel was very upset with Russia allowing this delegation to come.
Right.
The timing of this, what message is being sent? I think it's very clear that Russia is making it known where they're siding with this situation.
Yes, but of course,
I think the mask has come off. It's not just the gloves have come off with countries that we know had the gloves off anyway, but the masks are coming off. We're seeing where people really stand, where these states really stand in terms of Israel.
Well, but, I think there's still a bit of a mask in the sense that Russia says, we want them here so that we can talk about the hostages. We want to talk about a two-state solution. Well, that's a mask. In reality, they're now taking sides. And frankly, let's talk about Turkey.
Couldn't agree more. Erdogan, he comes out with a statement basically saying that Hamas was completely justified in doing what they did in attacking and killing in one day 1,400 Israelis.
I mean, if any government leader or any professor was to come up with a statement like that, I mean, they would be immediately ridiculed.
And Senator Mike Lee, he spoke today from the Senate floor saying that he believes that Turkey should be removed from NATO as a result. They should never have been admitted to begin with, and they should be removed from NATO.
This is not a NATO position in any way, shape, or form.
And in all consistency, Erdogan, he was the one when Ukraine war, when all that's going on, he never had any sanctions, never agreed to any sanctions against Russia,
Right.
permitted their planes to fly over Turkey.
And of course, under the guise of saying, look, we want to be in a position of the negotiator, right? We want to be the one who brokers peace. And we thought that was going to be the case when all this first broke on October 7th, that maybe Erdogan/Turkey would be stepping up to broker peace.
But there's a reason why he didn't come out negative against Hamas. It's because one of his good old friends was one of the chief architects of the attack on October 7th.
Right. So now Erdogan is coming out again, /Turkey is coming out, and no, he's not calling Hamas a terrorist. No, he's calling them freedom fighters.
Freedom fighters.
And so, again, what we're seeing right now is a realigning of alliances, and we're seeing a new axis of powers. And frankly, it's rather kind of alarming because we're seeing quite a number of the BRICS nations moving into
When you
that
look
alignment.
at the BRICS nations, you're talking about Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, plus 7.
Right.
The 7 other nations, many of them predominantly from the Middle East and Africa.
Because you've got to include Iran.
You're now talking 75% of the world population represented by the BRICS plus 7.
Exactly. So this is concerning. We are seeing a realignment. And of course, we are seeing China, very, very concerning, the movement of China now towards Russia, towards Iran.
And by the way, speaking of BRICS today, they'll launch their own payment platform.
See?
So that they can do company to company, country to country payments. It's not going to replace the dollar standard, but nevertheless, the mechanisms are being put in place to unravel the current geopolitical structure.
And we are seeing incremental steps towards that BRICS currency. That's another topic. I really want to cover that on a future podcast. But I want us to give this update on Israel and the players around that, because I think we need to watch for the signs of the times. We need to stay on the alert.
And that really takes us, I think, again, to what we've talked about before, Ezekiel 38 and 39, which is the Battle of Gog and Magog, which specifically names certain actors that will come against Israel. They'll be outnumbered and outgunned, and those actors include Russia, we talked about them, Persia, Iran, and then Turkey. And so you have those actors there. And before, Turkey was, okay, will the real Erdogan please come forward? And now
he has.
He's made his bed. He has made his plans known by how he sided with things. And so now we're seeing, again, that chessboard of biblical prophecy. Everything, all the pieces are coming into place. And Israel is in a very, what we would look at from a human standpoint, a very vulnerable position. Yes, they have the United States as their ally, and there are those leaders from Western Europe that are coming and saying, we support you, we support your right to defend yourself to a degree. There's always that condition that we want to qualify that to a degree. But in many ways, Israel's all alone. I think. I see them being all alone. Yes, they have the United States support, but I see them also feeling very quite isolated right now. And I see the stage being set for the Battle of Gog and Magog. What are your thoughts?
No, I agree. I would like to do another update on that Battle of Gog and Magog, Ezekiel 38, 39. I believe it's time for an update, but I know that today's not the day. We want to just focus on giving an update on what is happening currently with Israel and Gaza.
It is interesting to see how these pieces are all coming together, though.
I agree. We need to watch.
Right before our very eyes.
We are seeing really that alignment that you see in Ezekiel 38 and 30. We are seeing it now. And I think this is really important.
Aggressively so.
Very
Even
much.
6 months ago.
Who would have thought?
Never would have thought.
Right.
Well, it's been a blessing to have this time with you to process together the various things that are happening. We hope it's been a blessing for you too. We'd encourage you to take a look at our website. Please visit blessors.org. That's blessors with an ORS.org. There you will find articles that we've written with a biblical perspective concerning Israel in the Middle East so that you're aware of what the Bible says in regards to current events. Also, you'll see curated articles from other sources so that you get the best information possible to give you a 360 view of what's going on in Israel and the Middle East. Also encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube, Spotify, Rumble, and Apple Podcast channels. And make sure you also follow us on Facebook, Getter, and Twitter. Again, it's been a blessing to have you with us today. Encourage you also to prayerfully consider supporting Blessors of Israel as we seek to equip the church to know how to stand with Israel in the latter days. We also covet your prayers. Now remember, those who bless Israel will be blessed. Shalom, shalom.